Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Danny Taylor. I am the co-owner of Vegan Proteins Online Coaching, and today we are going to be talking about moderation. So at Vegan Proteins, we talk a lot about moderation and how it is important to have things in moderation and do things in moderation when you have a fitness or physique goal that you want to reach. But sometimes people ask us, okay, cool, moderation, what does that mean? And it has occurred to me that I have fallen short and just assumed people would know what that means. And I have not clearly defined it, possibly out of sheer laziness, because it's not an easy thing to define. So when you actually look up the definition of moderation, it means an avoidance of excess, a restraint. And what does that mean when it comes to training and dieting, specifically eating? This is where people, I think, have the hardest time. Is like, what does it mean to eat in moderation? And I think that why it is so hard to define is you could have one person who experiences moderation as having 1 can of soda per day instead of 4. You could have one person who experiences moderation as putting their fork down before they're feeling stuffed. You could have someone else who experiences moderation as actually having a piece of cake at the birthday party instead of avoiding it. So what I'm trying to say is that moderation is going to look different for every person. The context is key when it comes to what moderation actually means. So if you've watched any of our videos, you know that we don't believe in cookie cutter diets in general because every person requires a different amount of food, a different amount of calories, carbohydrates, fats, protein. And at different times in their life, one person will require and at different points in even one person's life, they are going to require different amounts of food, calories, carbs, fats, proteins, depending on what their goal is. So for example, using myself, when my goal is specifically to build muscle like it is right now, I'm eating close to 2,500 calories per day. But when my goal is to walk across a bodybuilding stage, my calories are going to get, probably below the 1,400 range for that particular goal. But I think it's important to practice moderation regardless of what the goal is in that minute. So what the heck does that mean?
And right now in this country, that's what we need, more moderates.
No. So going back to the 3 people that I just described before, the person having 1 can of soda instead of 4, the person having the cupcake instead of not having it, and the person just putting their fork down before they're stuffed, they're all practicing moderation and they're all doing it right. Because not only do our individual needs define what's going to be moderate for us, also our goals, also the way that we were raised is going to help define what is moderate to us versus somebody else. So it's really important to remember that as well. One of the ways that I think it's helpful to think of moderation, and this is maybe something you could say to yourself when you are also trying to practice moderation, is stop before you hurt yourself. So hear me out. What that means is stop X, Y, Z before you get to a point where your body or your mind can't tolerate it without adverse effects. So, for example, for somebody with high blood pressure, they may be able to partake in, a small amount of salty potato chips, for example, but then the rest of the day, they're going to have to forego salt entirely. If they were to salt all of their food or eat a lot of salty potato chips, there would be adverse reactions to that. They could hurt their blood pressure rather than keep it the same or lower it. Psychologically speaking, somebody who has been very restrictive for a long time, who's trying to practice moderation and sort of enjoying some of the sweeter things that life has to offer from time to time, such as a piece of cake at a birthday party, maybe they're not having like the pizza and the chips and the cake. Maybe they're having salad and a small piece of cake, because to try and have more than that might just be more stressful than their mind can handle in that moment. And that's okay. So I do have some general guidelines of things anybody can do to try and practice moderation. So there's sort of two sides to moderation. And the one that we hear about in like the mainstream media is more to make it so that the sort of fun foods or less nutritional foods or the junk food that you're having makes up a small portion of your diet. So that's one direction you can go with moderation, where you're, enjoying pizza, for example, but you're having a small amount of it instead of having it multiple times per day, or having, sugary cereal for breakfast, pizza for lunch, and chicken wings for dinner with ice cream for dessert. That is not moderation. So I think when we're speaking to the general public, who, is not the healthiest demographic, I think that is the direction that we should be talking most of the time. However, I also do work with a lot of athletes who are on a day-to-day basis so restrictive, eating exactly the macros they need to eat, eating only whole, healthy, unprocessed, plant-based foods all of the time, that a lot of times they end up feeling really, really deprived from other things and psychologically suffering from it a bit. And in those cases, I think practicing moderation is occasionally incorporating in some more fun foods into their day-to-day life without guilt. So those are kind of two different moderate camps that I think are really important, and you should identify which one of those people you tend to err on the side of, and then keep that in mind as we go forward here. So I personally have actually been on both sides of that spectrum before. When I very first got into fitness, I was so restrictive about the foods that I could eat, the amounts that I could eat. I did not attend many social gatherings, and I just constantly felt like I was white knuckling it all the time because I was so rigid. And then if I ever did decide that I was gonna have a cookie or something, it was never one cookie. It was all of the cookies. So it was this wild swinging of back and forth in that regard. And then there was a point in my flexible dieting journey. You guys know I wrote Flexible Dieting for Vegans in 2014. I've been practicing flexible dieting since 2013. But when I first got into it, I was so excited that I could fit Oreos into my macros and make it work and still get abs, which yes, you can do, that I was working in a lot of not so nutrient dense foods. I was still getting great physique results, but I didn't always feel good. Sometimes my stomach was not settled, or my skin was not acting the way I would like my skin and hair and nails to look. They were not responding to it well, which makes sense because I was eating a lot of junk, which was crowding out a lot of otherwise healthy foods. So I've been on both sides of this, and that is why I am able to say with a fair bit of certainty that practicing moderation, regardless of what side you fall on, is very, very important. So my first tip for eating in moderation is always going to be to eat until you are satisfied, not stuffed. This is really, really important. We have a natural gauge built into us, and it's called hunger. Now, depending on how long you've been ignoring your hunger or your fullness, your cues might be a little hard to hear, but it's worth practicing, listening to them again. And when you are eating, whether that is a piece of pizza or cake or something, kind of treat-like, eat until you are satisfied, but you don't want to gorge yourself on these foods. There's nothing moderate about that. And on the flip side of that, for my more restrictive type whole food, plant-based dieter friends, like I see you eating troughs of salad, absolute buckets of whole grains and beans and whole watermelons, and that is, you are eating until you're stuffed, whether you realize it or not. And this is an instance where, it might be in your best interest to include something that's a little bit denser so you don't have to eat such a tremendous volume of food. If you have to eat until your stomach feels like it's going to explode just to get in the nutrients that you need on a day-to-day basis, that's not moderate either. The next one would be to eat a variety of foods. So you want to be eating foods from all of the food groups, the fruits, the vegetables, the nuts, the seeds, the whole grains, the legumes. You want to be trying to eat from all of these categories, lots of colors on a regular basis. That's really going to help. One, it's going to help with a lot of different cravings because you're going to be getting a well-rounded number of nutrients that you need, plenty of fiber, ample amounts of protein and healthy fats. And it's also going to crowd out more unhealthy foods if you tend towards that side of like indulging in treats too much. Definitely make sure you look at what you're eating, eat a wide variety of food. The next one is going to be to eat when you're hungry most of the time. So if you find yourself reaching for food, as many of us have, actually ask yourself, am I hungry right now? If the answer is no, see if you can find some different way to cope with whatever it is that you're feeling in that minute that isn't food. So if you're bored or stressed or tired, if you're bored, go find something to do. If you're stressed, maybe take some deep breaths. If you're tired, go to bed. Food is not the answer if hunger is not the problem. So always remember that. However, again, for my folks who err on the side of too restrictive, sometimes you're in a situation that is more social or celebratory and you're not necessarily hungry, but this is important for your social bonding with other people. Holidays are a great example of this, where you have some of what your great aunt Sally made you for Thanksgiving because she made it special for you. You're not really hungry, but you're gonna have a little bit anyway. That's okay. We should be waiting until we're hungry to eat most of the time, but you don't have to do that all of the time to still be within moderation. And the last one is to be selective about the treats that you have. So I always talk about this at Thanksgiving, which it is not, it is almost June. And I always say, save your indulgences for things you can only get at that time and place. So plates of Oreos and bowls of tortilla chips and salsa, you can walk into any 7-Eleven and get that anytime. There's nothing special about it. To me, not worth the splurge. But something somebody made special for you, or something that only comes around once a year or is particular to that season, those are the things you want to consider indulging in. And that doesn't mean you have to indulge in them, but if you want to, you shouldn't feel bad or wrong if you have a little bit of XYZ treats. But that also doesn't mean you should fall into this mentality of treat yourself every time something enters your field of vision that sounds good. When you eat it, that is not moderation. Treating yourself all the time just then becomes a lifestyle of eating not so healthy foods. So watch that trap, because a lot of people think that is moderation, and that is not moderation. So just as a very general rule, I like to have most of my foods, 80% of my foods, come from healthy, whole food, plant-based sources, and then the other 20%-ish be more fun foods. It's putting vegan cheese on my vegetables at night or having some ice cream at the end of the day, but it doesn't make up a large portion of my day. And if my goal is to walk across that stage, it's going to be even more tight. It's going to be more like 90-10 than 80-20, personally, for me. So what does moderation and eating in moderation mean to you? I would love to know. Please leave it in the comments below. What has worked for you? What hasn't worked for you? If you like this video, go ahead and like the video, subscribe, hit the bell, all the things I'm supposed to tell you to do at the end of a video, and we will see you next time. Bye.